If you'd told me 17 years of loyalty would end on a Zoom call, I would have laughed. But that's exactly how it happened. My name is James Callahan. I'm 55 years old, and up until last month, I was a senior safety engineer at Elcor Dynamics, a major energy company based in Houston, Texas. I gave that place everything I had: long hours, holidays, missed birthdays, even my lower back, if we're being honest. I wasn't just another employee. I was part of the foundation, or so I thought. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was working from home like always. Tuesdays and Thursdays were my remote days, part of Elcor's shiny new hybrid work initiative they've been bragging about in press releases. Around 9:15 a.m., I got a calendar invite titled Urgent, HR and Operations, 10:30 a.m. No agenda. Just the kind of vague urgency that makes your stomach drop. At 10:30 sharp, I joined the meeting. Two familiar faces appeared, Marcia from HR and Clay Benson, our freshly minted VP of Operations. Clay was a flashy hire from the East Coast. MBA, slick hair, perfect suit, zero understanding of how things actually worked around here. The man barely said 5 words to me in 6 months. James, Marcia started, with that overly sweet tone HR people use when they're about to gut you politely. First off, we want to thank you for your many years of service. I knew then. I didn't need to hear the rest, but I did. Phrases like realigning organizational priorities and eliminating role redundancies floated across the screen like corporate confetti. Clay leaned in with his rehearsed line, "This isn't personal, it's just a strategic shift." I kept my expression neutral. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing what that moment felt like. They told me my access would be revoked by end of day, that a courier would pick up my company laptop and badge, and that I'd receive my transition package via email. No warning, no heads up, no meeting with my direct supervisor. Just a cold goodbye read off a screen by two people who wouldn't last half as long as I had. I clicked Leave Meeting and stared at the empty desktop in front of me. My hands were still resting on the keyboard, like they hadn't gotten the message yet. Carol, my wife of 28 years, stepped into the room a few minutes later. She didn't need to ask. She saw it on my face. "That was it?" she asked softly. I nodded. She crossed the room and put her hand on my shoulder. We didn't talk much after that. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. That night, over dinner, I kept replaying things in my head. Not the meeting, I had already buried that. I started thinking about what I'd seen over the years, the things no one else had paid attention to. Vendor invoices that didn't match the work done. Site safety audits that had been changed after submission. Budget reports that showed funding going to consultants no one had ever met. I never brought any of it up. Wasn't my job to ask those questions. Or maybe I just didn't want to rock the boat. But now the boat had sunk, and they'd left me floating in the wreckage. The funny thing about being the quiet one in the room is people forget you're paying attention. But I always was. I had records, notes, time-stamped reports, things they didn't know I'd kept. They thought they got rid of me with a Zoom call. What they didn't know was, when they fired James Callahan, they didn't end the story. They lit the fuse.
The next morning, I woke up at 5:30 out of habit. For 17 years, my day had started before sunrise. Now there was nowhere to be, no meetings, no inspection reports, no early calls with field supervisors. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the slow creak of the wooden floor under my feet. Carol was still asleep. I made coffee, like always, sat by the window, and stared out at the fence I built myself the year we bought this house. Everything felt the same, but I wasn't. They thought they'd fired a man who would disappear quietly. What they didn't know is that I'd always been quiet, but I'd never disappeared. And I sure as hell didn't forget. Over the years, I'd archived documents. I don't know why, call it instinct. I had a personal drive where I kept everything that didn't sit right, contracts that were rewritten at the last minute, emergency vendor approvals pushed through with no audit trail, emails that hinted at liability but were conveniently buried in follow-ups. I wasn't looking to blow the whistle. I just believed in keeping receipts. I pulled out the drive from the back of my desk drawer and started reviewing the files. I organized everything. Timestamps, signatures, inconsistencies. Patterns started to emerge. Same vendor names cropping up in different departments. Same executives authorizing high-risk adjustments with no oversight. And always under Clay Benson's new streamlined chain of command. I didn't react emotionally. That wasn't my way. I was methodical, measured. My job had been identifying risk before it exploded. Corrosion, gas leaks, equipment failure. This was no different. Just a different kind of pipeline ready to burst. Around noon, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Ethan Torres. He used to work at Elcor, one of the sharpest internal auditors we had before he resigned abruptly 3 years ago. Said he was tired of fighting uphill. I never pushed him for the real reason. When he picked up, he sounded surprised. "James Callahan. Haven't heard that voice in a long time. You got a minute?" "For you, always." I kept it vague over the phone, just enough to let him know I was sitting on something. He agreed to meet the next day at a diner halfway between our neighborhoods. Before we hung up, he said something that stuck with me. "I always thought if anyone would finally pull the curtain back at Elcor, it'd be you." That night, Carol and I sat on the porch like we always did. She didn't ask about the job. She just listened as I talked through what I'd found, softly, slowly, like I was untangling a wire from inside my own chest. "I made a mistake," I said finally. "What mistake?" "They assumed I needed that job more than I needed my name." She nodded, her hand over mine. "Then make it count." The next morning, I pulled out my old field notebooks, not digital logs, actual notebooks, the kind with grease smudges and dirt in the seams. I flipped through them and cross-referenced old safety audits against what I now knew had been altered. That's when I found it. An incident from 4 years ago, a pipeline valve failure that nearly caused a shutdown. My report had recommended full replacement, but the final document that went to corporate had downgraded it to routine maintenance. The vendor who signed off on the edit? Same one Clay had been quietly funneling emergency contracts to. They didn't just fire me. They tried to bury a liability, and they left the shovel in my hand. I wasn't interested in revenge, not in the way people think. I didn't want Clay to suffer. I didn't want Marcia to cry. I wanted something better. I wanted the truth to weigh on them the way it had weighed on me. And now, I was finally ready to put it on record.
Ethan and I met at a diner just off Highway 6, the kind of place where the waitress knows the regulars and the coffee tastes like it's been on the burner since sunrise. We took a booth in the back. He looked older than I remembered, gray at the temples, eyes a little tired, but the moment I laid the documents on the table, I saw the spark come back. He flipped through the pages in silence, vendor contracts, internal emails, discrepancies between field audits and submitted reports. His expression didn't change, but his fingers tightened on the paper. "This is worse than I thought," he muttered.
way worse. "You saw it too, didn't you?" I asked. Ethan nodded. "I left because I couldn't fix it from inside. Every time I flagged something, it got buried. And after Clay showed up, it got worse. New vendors, less oversight. He called it agile management. I called it a cover." I leaned back. "I think they're laundering money through ghost contractors." He didn't argue, just said, "Yeah, I think so too." We spent 2 hours laying everything out. Ethan still had contacts, former compliance guys, a retired procurement officer who'd seen strange approvals come through with forged sign-offs. He promised to reach out, discreetly. When I got home, I dug deeper. I started pulling archive data from my personal backups. Over the years, I'd stored thousands of inspection files, time-stamped and geotagged. What I found made my stomach turn. There were entire maintenance reports that had been falsified. I'd marked certain pipelines for immediate shutoff until repairs could be completed, but those systems had remained active. Why? Because someone in corporate had downgraded the severity. Same name, every time. Derek Sloan, head of risk management. One of Clay's inner circle. I looked up the vendors attached to those approvals. One name came up again and again. Baybridge Solutions. Sounded legit, had a clean website. But the business address, a mailbox in a strip mall in San Antonio. I ran a public business registration search. The listed owner? A woman named Maria Sloan. Derek's wife. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just sloppy bookkeeping or poor oversight. This was organized, controlled, and deeply entrenched. Clay hadn't come to Elcor to clean house. He'd come to take over. And he was doing it the same way every corporate predator does. Cut costs, shift liabilities, funnel contracts to shell companies, and bury anyone who asked questions, including me. I called Ethan. "I think we've got a problem," I said. "No," he replied calmly, "they've got a problem." The next week, I spent every waking hour building a case. I didn't go public, not yet. I didn't even file an official complaint. That would come later. Right now, I was preparing the battlefield, quietly, methodically. I created a secure archive. Every file, every scanned document, every email was uploaded to encrypted cloud storage and mirrored on 2 separate drives. One I kept in a safe at home. The other I gave to a lawyer I trusted, Janet Holloway, an old friend of Carol's who used to prosecute corporate fraud before she moved into private practice. She didn't ask for drama. She asked for proof. I gave her more than enough. She flipped through the document slowly. "You understand this could lead to a federal investigation," she said. "I do." "And you're ready for what that means?" I met her eyes. "I'm not looking for a courtroom. I'm looking for accountability. But if it comes to that, I'm not blinking." Janet nodded. "Good. Because this isn't just corporate theft. This is endangerment. Those pipelines you flagged, they kept them active." I nodded. "For years." She closed the file. "Then it's not just about money anymore. It's about lives." And right then, I knew something I hadn't realized until that moment. This wasn't revenge. It was responsibility.
I'd spent my whole career solving problems others didn't know existed. Leaks under concrete slabs, gas sensors with half-second delays, corrosion no one could see but that I could smell in the air. Strategy was part of my blood. And now, the same instincts that had kept crews alive on job sites were guiding me into this new kind of war. Janet laid out the legal terrain. "If we go to the SEC," she said, "they'll take it seriously, but it'll move slow, months, maybe longer.
Same with OSHA, if we frame it as safety fraud. But if what you're saying is true about forged maintenance reports and falsified audits, this is criminal. I nodded. It's fraud, negligence, maybe even racketeering if we trace the contract far enough. But I'm not just trying to bring down a few executives. I want to collapse the entire structure that made this possible. She smiled. Then we need leverage. That became the mission. Build leverage. Not noise, not headlines, just pressure. Quiet, steady pressure in all the right places. I started by mapping the network. Clay Benson was the face of it, but he wasn't alone. Derek Sloan, head of risk management. Megan Trask, VP of procurement. Her signature showed up on 3 suspicious contracts. Then there were the vendors, Baybridge Solutions, Lormax Holdings, Dynacap Energy, all paper-thin, all billing Elcor for inflated services, or in some cases, no services at all. Each had ties to someone inside the company, spouses, siblings, golf buddies. Ethan and I compiled everything, dates, names, payments, corporate filings, IP logs. It was like watching a spider web take shape in front of us. Every thread led back to the same core. Meanwhile, Janet reached out to someone she trusted inside the Department of Energy, a former colleague named Jason Wu, now working in compliance oversight. She sent him a sanitized preview of what we had, nothing that could backfire, but just enough to raise alarms. It worked. Within days, Jason asked for a meeting, quiet, off the record. While that ball started rolling, I planned my next move, exposure from the inside. Elcor hadn't revoked my access to internal systems properly, classic IT oversight. I still had credentials to a dormant field inspection portal, nothing sensitive on face value, but with the right routing, I could still log timestamps, pull old reports, even see system logs of file changes. I didn't mess with anything. I wasn't about sabotage, but I did record screen captures, who edited what reports, when, and under which admin credentials. I created a full audit trail that could later be replicated by investigators. Then came the turning point. Ethan found an old report, one that had his signature on it dated just before he left Elcor. The version filed internally had been altered. His recommendation for halting construction on a lateral pipeline in Odessa due to subsoil instability had been replaced with a go-ahead and a checklist marked low risk. They forged my report, he said, holding the paper like it burned. They put my name on it, but this isn't what I wrote. That's when Ethan changed. Before, he'd been cautious. Now he was angry. And when a good man gets angry for the right reasons, you better start counting your days. We brought the original report and the altered version to Janet. Her expression hardened. That's document fraud. And if that line had ruptured, it didn't, he said, but it could have. And if it ever does, it's on record that they ignored the warning. I could feel the walls starting to tighten. Elcor's silence had always been its strength, layers of plausible deniability wrapped in legal armor. But we were starting to crack that shell. And I hadn't even gone public yet. No press, no whistleblower leaks, not yet. Because when you only get one shot to expose the truth, it has to be clean, and it has to be lethal.
I chose a Thursday morning to pull the trigger. Not because it meant anything, but because Thursdays were always light at Elcor's downtown HQ. Clay's team usually worked remote, and the compliance department held its weekly planning call mid-morning. Fewer eyes meant less noise when the first cracks started showing. At 7:45 a.m., I scheduled a batch of emails to go out. One went to Jason Wu at the Department of Energy, another to an investigator at the SEC who Janet had quietly looped in, and one, precisely worded, went directly to Elcor's board of directors. The message was short. I attached a report, fully documented, time-stamped, and indexed, outlining over $18 million in questionable vendor contracts, 5 forged maintenance reports tied to safety risks, and the names of 4 senior executives directly or indirectly connected to the fraud. I didn't accuse. I showed. I knew how boards worked. Accusations get dismissed. Evidence forces action. By 8:05, I was sitting in my truck outside a hardware store nursing a lukewarm coffee when the first call came in. Unknown number. I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, another call, this time from Marcia at HR. Then Clay. I let them go to voicemail. By 8:23, I got a text from Ethan. Board's in emergency session. Phones are lighting up. You just hit the hornet's nest. I texted back one word. Good. Meanwhile, Janet confirmed the SEC had received the files. The Department of Energy, too. We hadn't filed anything formally yet. We were still in the cooperation phase, as Jason called it. But the moment we dropped that report, Elcor entered a new reality. I hadn't gone to the press, not yet. That was part of the strategy. Let the pressure build inside the company first. Let them scramble. Let them reveal who they really were when the lights came on. By 9:12, my inbox filled with 4 emails from Elcor's legal team, each one more aggressive than the last. They claimed I'd breached confidentiality, that I'd accessed systems illegally. They demanded I return proprietary documents. They threatened legal action. Standard intimidation tactics. Janet's reply to their general counsel was swift, clinical, and devastating. My client possesses evidence of systemic fraud, negligence, and criminal misconduct. All documentation was obtained prior to termination, during his period of employment, or through legally permissible means. If Elcor wishes to pursue litigation, we welcome the opportunity for discovery. That shut them up. For the next 24 hours, the silence was deafening. The next morning, Ethan called me. They're panicking. Internal audit has been pulled from every project. The procurement team is being sequestered. Clay hasn't shown his face since yesterday. And get this, Derek Sloan resigned this morning. No announcement, just gone. That was the first real fracture. Derek's departure meant someone was trying to cut their losses, create distance. But I wasn't interested in just peeling off the outer layers. I wanted the whole structure to fall. At noon, Jason from the DOE called. James, I'm off the record here, but this is serious. We've looped in justice. There's talk of opening a federal probe. If what you submitted holds up, and it looks like it does, you might have just uncovered one of the largest coordinated fraud operations in the energy sector in the last decade. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked out the windshield at the familiar streets I'd driven for years. I didn't want it to go this far, I said finally. I just wanted to be treated with decency. Jason's voice was calm. You were, by yourself. That evening, Carol and I sat out back under the porch light. She asked if I was okay. I think so, but this isn't over yet. She squeezed my hand. No, she said, but it's finally beginning.
By Monday morning, the story started leaking. I hadn't called the press. I didn't have to. These things have a way of finding daylight when the right people get nervous. An anonymous tip landed on the desk of a local investigative journalist who specialized in energy sector corruption. Her name was Dana Mercer. Sharp, relentless, and cautious enough to verify before printing. She reached out to me through Janet, asked for an interview. I declined. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew the system was already moving. The DOJ had contacted Janet for a follow-up interview. The SEC had issued a formal request for the original copies of our documents. And Jason Wu from the Department of Energy confirmed they were opening an investigation into Elcor Dynamics. That afternoon, I drove past the Elcor corporate office downtown. Not to gloat, just to watch. There were people moving in and out fast, not the usual rhythm of business. No, this was panic. A man I recognized, Greg Jordan, chief legal counsel, walked past me on the sidewalk, talking frantically into his phone, his face pale. He didn't see me. Back home, I checked my inbox. Ethan had forwarded a chain of internal emails, anonymously leaked from someone inside the company. Subject line: urgent. Hold all vendor disbursements pending audit. Another: suspension of all contracts tied to Baybridge Solutions and Dynacap. And then one from Clay himself. Short, defensive, and clearly rattled. We will conduct a full internal review. All team members are expected to cooperate fully. Any inquiries from outside parties should be directed to legal. Stay focused. We are still Elcor. Still Elcor. The arrogance of it. The same man who fired me without a second thought, who called it just business, was now scrambling to keep the ship from going under. But the holes were already flooding in. Tuesday morning, I got a call from Dana Mercer. She wasn't asking for permission this time. I verified 3 vendor connections, all fake, all linked to family members of current executives. I have 2 anonymous sources confirming audit reports were forged under pressure from leadership. I'm running the story. I didn't try to stop her. That evening, the headline broke. Whistleblower exposes $18 million fraud operation inside Elcor Dynamics. Safety reports falsified, ghost vendors paid. The article laid it out cleanly. No sensationalism, just facts. Dana was smart. She didn't name me, but she hinted at a longtime engineer turned watchdog and cited multiple verified internal documents and federal interest. The reaction was immediate. Elcor issued a rushed press release, full of legal padding. We take these allegations seriously, cooperating with authorities, reviewing internal controls, the usual. But it was too late. The following day, Clay Benson was placed on administrative leave. Not publicly, of course, but I heard it through Janet, and later through Jason Wu. The board had held a vote. Clay lost. And then came the cherry on top. Derek Sloan, who had resigned a few days earlier, was arrested. Wire fraud, document falsification, conspiracy. His wife, Maria, on paper the owner of Baybridge Solutions, was also under investigation. By Friday, every executive tied to one of the fake vendors was either suspended, under review, or lawyering up. The house of cards was falling, and the silence from those who fired me? Deafening. No apology, no explanation, but I didn't need one. Because the thing about betrayal is that once it's exposed, it has nowhere left to hide. And I hadn't just pulled the curtain back, I'd burned it down.
The Monday after the article broke, Elcor Dynamics didn't open on time. Security guards blocked the main entrance while federal agents moved through the glass doors in dark suits and windbreakers. Jason Wu sent me a message that morning with just 2 words. It started. News helicopters circled overhead by midday. Every Houston business outlet was covering it. By evening, it had gone national. CNBC ran a headline: Energy giant under federal investigation in fraud and safety cover-up. Stockholders panicked. Elcor's share price dropped 19% in a single day. Trading was halted twice. And then, the names started coming out. Derek Sloan had already been indicted. Now the spotlight turned to Megan Trask, the VP of Procurement,
who had approved over $6 million in inflated contracts without third-party verification. Investigators found that her brother-in-law owned one of the shell companies that billed Elcor for services never performed. The board, under immense pressure, released a formal statement. "We are aware of the investigation and are cooperating fully. Effective immediately, several members of senior leadership have been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of internal and external reviews." Clay Benson's name was not mentioned, but we all knew. By the end of the week, he was gone. Fired quietly, escorted from the building after 12 hours of private legal meetings. He never made a public comment, but that didn't stop the damage, because someone leaked the emails. An anonymous source sent Dana Mercer an internal thread showing Clay's approval of the vendor rotation scheme, complete with directives to keep documentation minimal and avoid full committee review to streamline contracting. The language was cold, detached. It wasn't just fraud, it was premeditated. When Dana published the follow-up story, it hit harder than the first. It painted a picture of systemic abuse. Not a few bad actors, but an organizational culture that rewarded silence and punished ethics. And suddenly, I wasn't the only one speaking out. 3 former employees came forward: engineers, compliance officers, and one woman from legal who'd left 2 years prior after she raised questions about vendor audits and was told, "This is above your pay grade." Each of them contacted Janet and provided statements. Ethan helped verify their claims. Together, we were building more than just a case. We were building a movement. The Justice Department launched a formal criminal probe. The Department of Energy froze Elcor's eligibility for new federal contracts. OSHA reopened safety reviews on 2 pipeline systems previously flagged, and now, with our original inspection records, they had proof of negligence. And then came the call I never expected. The Elcor board reached out to Janet with a proposal, a closed-door mediation. They wanted to settle, quickly, quietly. They offered a payout, a public apology, and the promise of full internal reform, including third-party oversight and compliance restructuring. Janet laid the document in front of me at her office. "They're not doing this out of goodwill. They're trying to save what's left." I stared at the document. It was all there. Numbers, agreements, legal language that smelled like surrender. Do we take it? I thought about it. Thought about the day they fired me over a Zoom call. Thought about the documents I'd collected. About Clay's smug face on that screen and how quiet the room got when he said, "It's just business." "No," I said. "Not yet." She raised an eyebrow. "You want to push?" "I want it public. I want the apology out loud. I want them to admit what they did in front of every person they ever lied to." Janet nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll demand. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about dignity. And after 17 years of loyalty, I was finally getting mine back. One headline at a time.
6 weeks later, I stood in the back of a packed auditorium at the Texas Energy Oversight Commission's annual summit. I wasn't there as an employee. I wasn't even on the guest list. But when the Elcor board chair stepped up to the podium under the sharp glare of media cameras, I listened. So did the dozens of contractors, regulators, and investors gathered around. Everyone wanted to see how deep the cut had gone. She cleared her throat, eyes flicking across the press. "On behalf of Elcor Dynamics," she said carefully, "we acknowledge that systemic failures in oversight, compliance, and internal accountability led to a betrayal of public trust. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators, and we have accepted the resignations of several executives who failed in their duties. We are committed to rebuilding integrity." There it was. No spin, no half measures. Just the truth, at last. She never mentioned my name. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room knew who I was. I felt it in the sideways glances, in the nods from former colleagues, in the way the reporters kept looking toward the back like they expected me to stand up and say something. I didn't. I just turned and walked out, sunlight sharp on my face as I stepped through the glass doors. I wasn't interested in applause. That was never the point. It took 17 years to build my reputation, and about 17 minutes for them to try and wipe it out. But the thing about truth is, it doesn't go away. It waits. It survives. That summer, Carol and I took a trip we'd been postponing for years. Drove up through New Mexico into Colorado. No plans, no itinerary, just the two of us, winding through red canyons and pine-covered hills, windows down, breathing deep again. One afternoon, we stopped at a small roadside diner. As we waited for our food, a man walked by our table, paused, and then turned around. "You're Callahan, right? From Elcor?" I nodded slowly. "Used to be." He stuck out his hand. "You did the right thing. My cousin worked maintenance down at the site in Odessa. They never told him about the pipeline issue. That could have been him in the blast if it had failed." I shook his hand. He walked away. That was all. But it meant more than any press release ever could. When we got back home, I didn't return to corporate work. I didn't want a corner office or a promotion from some competitor trying to spin my story into their PR. I turned them all down. Instead, I started something small, an independent safety consulting firm. Quiet, purposeful. I took on clients who actually listened when you flagged problems. I hired 2 former inspectors who'd been pushed out for speaking up. I built a system based on truth, not spin. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And that was enough. Sometimes I think about Clay, about how fast it all fell apart once the first lie unraveled. Last I heard, he was under indictment and living somewhere in Florida, trying to delay trial dates. I don't think about him often, but when I do, it's not with anger. It's with clarity. Because men like him always think they're invincible until they meet a man who doesn't flinch. And for 17 years, I'd kept my head down, played the long game, and stayed out of the spotlight, until the moment they forced me to choose between silence and self-respect. They chose for me when they fired me. I chose who I became after that. Not a victim, not a destroyer. A man who knew what was right and refused to let it be buried.